The cruelest paradox of avoidant attachment is that the person they treat worst is often the person who matters most, while the person they treat best is frequently someone they'll discard without a second thought. This inverted reality confuses and devastates partners who cannot understand why their depth of feeling and commitment is met with withdrawal and punishment, while the avoidant person seems perfectly capable of showing up for casual connections that mean nothing to them. The explanation lies in the fundamental mechanics of avoidant attachment. Genuine love triggers the avoidant person's deepest wounds and most intense defenses, creating a level of anxiety that makes treating that person well nearly impossible, while distractions provide relief from that anxiety precisely because they don't matter enough to trigger vulnerability. The person the avoidant genuinely loves activates every fear of abandonment, every wound around worthiness, every defense against dependence that the avoidant person has spent their life constructing. This activation makes the loved person feel dangerous, and the avoidant person responds to that danger through the defensive withdrawal, criticism, and emotional unavailability that characterizes their treatment of people who matter. But the distraction, the person they don't actually love, triggers none of these defenses because there's no real emotional investment. The avoidant person can be present, consistent, even affectionate with someone they don't love because that person represents no threat to their defended sense of self. Understanding the specific differences in how avoidants treat genuine love versus distractions reveals the tragic core of their attachment pattern. Their capacity for healthy relationship behavior exists, but is reserved for connections that don't threaten them with actual intimacy, while the connections that could provide genuine partnership are sabotaged by the very depth of feeling that makes them matter. The terror versus the comfort. How fear dictates treatment. The fundamental difference between how an avoidant person treats someone they genuinely love versus someone who is merely a distraction lies in the level of fear each person activates. The person the avoidant genuinely loves triggers existential terror rooted in their attachment wounds and core beliefs about intimacy. This person has become important enough that losing them would genuinely hurt, which means the avoidant person is vulnerable in ways that feel intolerable. Every interaction with the person they love carries the weight of this vulnerability, activating their nervous system's threat response and driving defensive behaviors that create distance and protect them from the pain they fear. The person who is a distraction activates no such fear because they fundamentally don't matter. There's nothing to lose, no real vulnerability, no threat of devastating hurt if things end. This absence of fear allows the avoidant person to engage without their defenses fully activating, creating the appearance of emotional health that disappears the moment genuine feelings develop. When the avoidant person is with someone they genuinely love, their internal experience is characterized by persistent low-level anxiety that can spike into intense panic during moments of closeness or intimacy. They feel the vulnerability of caring about someone who could reject them, abandon them, or disappoint them. They notice their own dependence on this person for happiness or emotional regulation. And this dependence terrifies them because it gives the person power to hurt them. They recognize that they're invested in ways they swore they would never be again, that they've allowed someone past their defenses, that they're repeating the pattern that led to pain before. All of this awareness creates overwhelming discomfort that the avoidant person manages through creating distance, withdrawing emotionally, finding flaws to focus on, or manufacturing reasons why the relationship won't work. This fear-driven treatment manifests in specific behaviors that devastate the person being treated this way. The avoidant becomes inconsistent, present one day, and distant the next, creating the hot and cold pattern that keeps their loved one perpetually confused and anxious. They withhold affection and verbal expressions of feeling, unable to say, I love you, or express appreciation because those words make the feelings real and undeniable. They create conflict over minor issues, picking fights as a way to create distance when closeness has become too intense. They focus on incompatibilities and problems, emphasizing reasons why the relationship shouldn't work as a way to protect themselves from how much they want it to work. They maintain escape routes, keeping one foot out the door through ambiguity about commitment, maintaining connections with exes, or avoiding integration of lives and social circles. The person who is a distraction receives entirely different treatment because they activate none of these fears. When the avoidant person is with someone they don't actually love, someone who is filling time or providing an ego boost or serving as a placeholder while they search for something better, they can be remarkably present and consistent. They show up for dates without the chronic cancellations that characterize their behavior with the person they love. They respond to messages promptly. They make plans and keep them. They're emotionally available in surface level ways because that availability doesn't threaten them with genuine vulnerability. This person gets to see a version of the avoidant that seems healthy, capable, even emotionally generous. And this version exists precisely because the connection lacks the depth that would activate defenses. The avoidant person with a distraction can be affectionate and complimentary because these expressions cost them nothing. They can say sweet things, offer physical affection, even use language of commitment or future because none of it is backed by genuine feeling that would make them vulnerable. The words and gestures are performance without substance, easy to offer because they don't represent real emotional risk. If this person leaves or rejects them, the avoidant person would be fine, possibly even relieved, so they can afford to be generous with affection that doesn't actually mean anything to them. The comfort the avoidant person feels with distraction shows in their body language and overall demeanor. With the person they love, the avoidant is often tense, guarded, uncomfortable in ways that might be subtle but are palpable. They maintain physical distance even when physically close. They struggle with eye contact during intimate moments. They seem restless or distracted even during quality time together. But with the distraction, the avoidant can be genuinely relaxed because there's no stakes. They can be physically affectionate without it triggering their defenses. They can make eye contact without feeling too exposed. They can be present without the constant internal monologue about whether they're getting too close or becoming too dependent. This differential treatment based on fear level creates a devastating situation for the person the avoidant genuinely loves. They're experiencing the worst version of the avoidant person, the most offended and unavailable version, precisely because they matter most. Meanwhile, they might observe or hear about the avoidant treating other people with a warmth and consistency that seems completely impossible in their relationship. This observation leads to the painful conclusion that the problem must be them, that they must be unlovable or doing something wrong, that if they were better or different, the avoidant person could show up for them the way they show up for others. But this conclusion is backwards. The avoidant treats them poorly, not because they matter too little, but because they matter too much. The fear that dictates the avoidance treatment also explains why the avoidant person often treats new partners better than long-term partners. In the beginning of a relationship, before genuine feelings have developed, before the person has become truly important, the avoidant can show up relatively well. They can be consistent and present because they are not yet vulnerable. But as feelings deepen, as the person becomes genuinely important, the avoidance treatment deteriorates. The hot and cold behavior emerges, the withdrawal increases, the criticism and devaluation begin. This deterioration over time reveals that the problem isn't the partner's behavior changing, but the avoidance fear increasing as the relationship becomes more real and more threatening to their defended sense of self. The consistency gap, where they invest their limited capacity. Avoidant people have limited capacity for relationship effort and emotional investment. Their defensive structure requires so much energy to maintain that they have minimal resources left for actually building and maintaining intimate connections. This limited capacity must be allocated, and the allocation reveals their priorities and internal experience. Counterintuitively, avoidants often invest more consistent effort into connections that don't matter to them than into the relationships that do matter, creating a consistency gap that devastates the people who love them while confusing the distractions who receive treatment that suggests more investment than actually exists. The person the avoidant genuinely loves experiences the avoidant at their worst in terms of consistency and reliability. Plans are made and canceled. Communication is sporadic and unpredictable. Commitment is promised and then withdrawn. The avoidant person seems incapable of maintaining basic relationship behaviors like regular contact, keeping commitments, or following through on things they've said they'll do. This inconsistency creates constant anxiety and insecurity in the partner who never knows which version of the avoidant they'll encounter or whether the person will show up at all. The inconsistency serves a protective function for the avoidant. It prevents the relationship from settling into a comfortable pattern that would increase intimacy and dependence, keeping them in control of distance and preventing the other person from feeling secure enough to make full emotional investment. But with distractions, people who don't actually matter to them, avoidants can demonstrate surprising consistency. They show up for dates with these people. They maintain regular communication. They follow through on plans without the chronic cancellations that characterize their behavior with the person they love. This consistency exists because it's low stakes. The avoidant person knows they could stop showing up at any time and it wouldn't matter to them emotionally. They're not building toward anything real, so they can maintain surface level consistency without it threatening them with genuine intimacy or dependence. The consistency is actually easier with someone they don't love because there's no anxiety driving defensive withdrawal. The allocation of effort reveals similar patterns. With the person they genuinely love, the avoidant person's effort is minimal and sporadic. They might make grand gestures occasionally, often when they sense they're losing the person, but day-to-day effort is lacking. They don't initiate quality time. They don't work to maintain emotional connection. They don't invest in understanding their partner's needs or meeting those needs consistently. They operate on minimal viable effort, doing just enough to keep the relationship from ending, but not enough to actually nourish it. This minimal effort stems from the avoidant person's need to protect themselves from becoming too invested, from caring too much, from depending too heavily on this person who has the power to hurt them. With distractions, the avoidant person can actually put in more consistent effort because it doesn't cost them anything emotionally. They might plan thoughtful dates because doing so is fun and makes them feel good about themselves without requiring actual emotional investment. They might remember details about the person's life and ask follow-up questions because this creates an impression of care without the vulnerability of actual caring. They might make romantic gestures or give gifts because these actions are easy when they're not backed by genuine feeling that would make them meaningful and therefore risky. The effort appears more impressive than the effort they give the person they love, but it's ultimately hollow because it's not motivated by genuine feeling or desire for deep connection. The consistency gap also shows in how the avoidant person handles conflicts and repairs in different relationships. With the person they genuinely love, conflicts trigger intense withdrawal. The avoidant person shuts down or disappears when issues arise. They avoid repair conversations and resist working through problems. They might agree to changes in the moment just to end an uncomfortable conversation, but they don't follow through on those agreements. This pattern leaves issues unresolved and creates accumulating damage to the relationship. The avoidant person's inability to engage with conflict and repair with the person they love stems from the fact that doing so would require vulnerability and emotional presence they cannot tolerate when they're already feeling threatened by how much they care. With distractions, however, the avoidant person can engage with conflicts more constructively because the conflicts don't matter. They can apologize more easily because the apology doesn't require genuine vulnerability. They can discuss issues more calmly because they're not actually invested in the outcome. They can even implement changes because those changes don't affect anything that matters to them. This apparent maturity and relationship skill with distractions makes the avoidant seem capable of healthy relating, and distractions might believe they're in a functional relationship with an emotionally available person. But this appearance is an illusion created by the absence of genuine feeling. The moment the distraction becomes important, the moment real feelings develop, the avoidant's capacity for constructive conflict engagement and repair will disappear, replaced by the defensive withdrawal that characterizes their relationships with people who actually matter. The consistency gap extends to how the avoidant person integrates different people into their life. The person they genuinely love is often kept separate from other areas of the avoidant's life. They don't meet friends or family for extended periods. They're not included in the avoidant person's social activities or daily routines. They exist in a separate compartment that the avoidant can control and contain. This separation serves to limit intimacy and prevent the person from becoming truly integrated into the avoidant's life in ways that would increase dependence and vulnerability. But distractions might be introduced to friends and included in social activities much more readily because this integration doesn't threaten the avoidant. The distraction meeting their friends doesn't create vulnerability because the avoidant doesn't actually care what the friends think or whether the integration goes well. It's performance of relationship without the substance that would make integration meaningful. The vulnerability test, what they risk, and for whom. The clearest distinction between how avoidants treat genuine love versus distractions lies in what they're willing to risk and what vulnerability they're willing to show. Vulnerability is the core challenge for avoidant people, the experience their entire defensive system is designed to prevent. The distribution of their limited capacity for vulnerability reveals who actually matters to them, and the pattern is counterintuitive. They show more vulnerability to people who don't matter while remaining rigidly defended with people they genuinely love. This inverted pattern stems from the fact that vulnerability with someone who matters feels unbearably dangerous, while vulnerability with someone who doesn't matter carries minimal risk. With the person they genuinely love, the avoidant person maintains maximum emotional defenses. They don't share their fears, insecurities, or struggles. They don't express needs or ask for support. They don't reveal the parts of themselves they consider unacceptable or weak. They present a curated version of themselves that hides anything that might be judged, rejected, or used against them. This defended presentation isn't conscious deception, but rather automatic protection. The avoidant person cannot allow the person they love to see them fully because being truly seen by someone who matters creates vulnerability that feels life-threatening. If this person sees their weaknesses and rejects them, if this person knows their needs and doesn't meet them, if this person discovers their true self and finds it unacceptable, the pain would be unbearable. So they hide, they defend, they maintain walls that prevent genuine knowing. This defended stance shows in specific ways. The avoidant person doesn't cry or show emotional distress in front of the person they love. They handle difficulties alone rather than reaching out for support. They minimize their struggles and insist they're fine, even when they're clearly not. They avoid discussions about feelings, their own, or the relationships. They cannot express needs directly, either going without or expecting the person to guess what they need without them having to ask. They cannot admit when they're wrong or have hurt the person because that would require the vulnerability of acknowledging impact and taking responsibility. All of these defenses prevent the person they love from truly knowing them, which prevents genuine intimacy while protecting the avoidant from the vulnerability genuine intimacy would require. With distractions, however, the avoidant person can show surprising vulnerability precisely because it doesn't actually cost them anything. They might share fears or insecurities with someone they don't love because that person's judgment or rejection wouldn't hurt them. They might express needs because having those needs unmet by someone who doesn't matter wouldn't be devastating. They might show emotion because being seen in a vulnerable state by someone they don't care about doesn't threaten them with the judgment and rejection they fear from someone whose opinion actually matters. This selective vulnerability confuses people who witness it because it appears that the avoidant is capable of emotional openness, just not with their actual partner. The vulnerability test also shows in what the avoidant person is willing to risk for different people. With the person they genuinely love, they risk very little. They won't risk their comfort by engaging in difficult conversations. They won't risk their independence by making commitments. They won't risk their pride by apologizing or admitting fault. They won't risk rejection by expressing their feelings openly. They won't risk disappointment by depending on the person for anything important. This risk aversion keeps them safe, but prevents the relationship from developing the depth and trust that comes from taking risks together and having those risks pay off through deeper connection. With distractions, the avoidant can appear to take more risks because those risks aren't actually risky. They might make statements about commitment or future that sound meaningful but aren't backed by genuine intention or feeling. They might be more open about feelings they don't actually have. They might make themselves more available or adjust their life in ways they wouldn't for the person they love. Because these adjustments don't matter when the relationship doesn't matter. The appearance of risk-taking without actual emotional risk creates an impression that the avoidant is more invested than they are, leading distractions to believe they're building something real when they're actually serving as a placeholder or distraction from the avoidant's real feelings for someone else. The avoidant person's vulnerability around their past and their wounds also differs dramatically. With the person they genuinely love, the avoidant keeps their history and the experiences that shape them carefully guarded. They might share basic facts, but they don't share the emotional impact of those experiences. They don't reveal the wounds that created their avoidant patterns. They don't allow the person to understand the fear and pain beneath their defenses. This protection of their history prevents true understanding, which prevents the deep compassion and acceptance that could actually help them heal. But with distractions, the avoidant might share more about their past because that sharing doesn't create real intimacy. They can talk about difficult experiences without the vulnerability of being truly seen in those experiences because the distraction's understanding and acceptance doesn't actually matter to them. The vulnerability test reveals that the avoidant person's capacity for openness and risk-taking exists, but is withheld from the people who matter most. This creates a tragic situation where the person the avoidant loves never gets to see their genuine self, never experiences the vulnerability that would create real intimacy, never gets the version of the avoidant that could actually build a healthy relationship. Meanwhile, distractions who don't matter receive glimpses of vulnerability that suggest emotional availability that would disappear if they became actually important. The avoidant is most offended precisely where they should be most open, and most open precisely where it doesn't matter, inverting the natural pattern of intimacy and ensuring that their deepest connections are the most superficial, while their superficial connections can appear surprisingly deep. The timeline factor, who they run from and who they keep around. The final crucial difference between how avoidants treat genuine love versus distractions appears in the timeline of these relationships and the patterns of staying versus leaving. The pattern is counterintuitive but revealing. Avoidants often run from people they genuinely love while maintaining long-term casual connections with people who mean nothing to them. This inverted timeline reveals that the avoidant person's capacity to maintain a relationship is inversely proportional to how much the relationship matters to them. The more they care, the shorter the relationship or the more tumultuous and on-again, off-again it becomes. The less they care, the longer and more stable the connection can be. The person the avoidant genuinely loves experiences a relationship characterized by instability and the constant threat or reality of ending. The avoidant person regularly threatens to leave, creates distance that feels like a prelude to ending, or actually ends things multiple times only to return when their anxiety about the ending exceeds their anxiety about the intimacy. This pattern of breaking up and getting back together, or of chronic almost breakups that never quite happen but create constant insecurity, stems from the avoidant person's genuine conflict about the relationship. Part of them wants to stay because they love the person. Another part needs to leave because that love makes them vulnerable in ways that feel intolerable. This internal conflict creates the instability that characterizes their most important relationships. The avoidant person with someone they genuinely love is constantly evaluating whether to stay or leave. They notice incompatibilities and problems as evidence they should leave. They experience their anxiety about closeness as evidence the relationship isn't right. They maintain exit strategies and keep one foot out the door emotionally, even while physically remaining in the relationship. This constant evaluation and preparation for leaving creates an atmosphere of impermanence that prevents both people from fully investing in building a life together. The person who loves the avoidant learns they cannot count on the relationship lasting, that at any moment, the avoidant might decide they're done, that nothing is secure or stable. But with distractions, people the avoidant doesn't actually love, the timeline can be surprisingly long and stable. The avoidant person can maintain casual, ongoing connections with these people for months or years precisely because there's no pressure to deepen, no expectation of commitment, no vulnerability required. These connections are easy to maintain because they stay surface level. The avoidant can see these people occasionally, have pleasant interactions, and then return to their independent life without the anxiety that seeing the person they love would create. These long-term casual connections can make it seem like the avoidant is capable of sustained relationship, but the sustainability exists only because the relationship lacks the depth that would make it unsustainable for them. The timeline difference also shows in how the avoidant person ends different relationships. When they end things with someone they genuinely love, the ending is often messy, painful, and incomplete. The avoidant might ghost or fade away rather than having an actual ending conversation. They might end things badly, picking a fight or creating drama that makes the ending the other person's fault, rather than taking responsibility for choosing to leave. They might end things but then try to maintain contact or friendship because they can't fully let go, even though they can't stay. The messiness of these endings reveals the avoidant person's actual conflict and pain about losing someone who matters, even though they're choosing to create that loss. When the avoidant ends things with a distraction, however, the ending is often clean and relatively painless. They simply stop reaching out, and they don't respond if the person reaches out to them. They might have a brief ending conversation where they're calm and rational, explaining that they don't see things going anywhere. They can end it definitively without the anguish that characterizes endings with people they love because they're not actually losing anything that matters to them. The distraction might be confused or hurt by the ending, but the avoidant person is fine almost immediately, experiencing relief or indifference, rather than the complicated grief and regret that follows endings with people they genuinely loved. The pattern of who the avoidant keeps in their life long term also reveals who matters. Paradoxically, the people the avoidant genuinely loved are often not in their life at all, because those relationships became too intense and had to be fully ended to protect the avoidant from their own feelings. But distractions might remain as ongoing casual connections, people the avoidant reaches out to occasionally for company or an ego boost, but who never progress to anything deeper. The avoidance life is often populated by these surface-level long-term connections, while the people who matter deeply are conspicuously absent, having been cut off entirely because the feelings were too threatening to manage through maintaining any contact. The timeline factor also reveals itself in how the avoidant person thinks about and refers to different people from their past. When they talk about someone they genuinely loved, there's often nostalgia, regret, or complicated feelings. They idealize these past relationships in ways that reveal they mattered, even if they couldn't maintain them. They wonder about what could have been. They compare current partners unfavorably to these past loves. But when they reference distractions from their past, there's indifference or barely any memory of these people at all. They might struggle to remember details about people they dated for months because those people never mattered enough to create a lasting emotional impression.